Okay, you ready, Kenzie?
I'm ready, Mr. Chair.
Okay. In lieu of a gavel, I will use a reusable water bottle. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Planning, Development, and Transportation Committee. My name is Matt O'Malley. We are here to discuss Docket 0212. This is a working session on an initiative sponsored by the District 8 Councillor, Councillor Kenzie Bach, and myself. This is a follow-up working session to a hearing that Councillor Bach and I originally introduced last year. We had a hearing, I believe, in November, and obviously the importance of the work has only intensified since then. And since October of last year, we've seen nearly 10,000. I'm sure we've surpassed that mark of evictions across the Commonwealth, and fully 1/10 or 1,000 of those have been in Suffolk County alone. So the work has never been more important. Councillor Bach, to her credit and to our great fortune as members of this committee and city officials, has put forth a really interesting, and I completely support the findings in a memorandum that she submitted, sent to many of us. That's one of the items that we're going to be discussing as well. Forgive me, I don't quite have kind of doing this by the fly of our pants, or seat of my pants, flying by the seat of my pants, to mix metaphors. Councillor Wu is the chair of the committee. I know she will take over once she joins us, and I know we have a number of panelists here. Just looking around, Mike Christopher, of course, from the BPDA, as well as Brian Glasscock, Michelle McCarthy, I believe Lizzie Torres, Tim Davis, Jessica Boatright, are all directors at either DND or the BPDA, who are going to be joining us as well. I see, of course, Councillor Bach, the lead sponsor in this, Councillor Mejia, Councillor Flynn, Councillor Braden have joined us, and as future councillors join us, we'll be sure to add them as well. Sorry, I'm just trying to navigate the page. Oh, Councillor Essaibi George as well, I see, has joined us. So we're going to get right into it. I wanted to turn the panel over to Councillor Bach for opening remarks, and then maybe we'll get right into the administration. And again, this is a working session, which is a little bit different than a hearing. It's going to be more of a conversation, less of a formalized setting, but really looking forward to discussing issues as it relates to making it easier for individuals to build deeply affordable housing in the city of Boston. The need has never been greater. Later this afternoon, there'll be a hearing on IDP changes, and I think that this dovetails nicely on just the immense work ahead of us. So, Councillor Bach, the floor is now yours for an opening statement.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, and thank you to all my colleagues for being here, and to the BPDA and DND for joining us. As the chair said, we had a hearing on this last year, and the momentum for this was really occasioned sort of on two fronts. One was that we saw an unfortunate lawsuit sort of holding up this major signature project in JP that gives us the opportunity for some 100% deeply affordable housing supported by Pine Street Inn and the community builders, and was a real kind of frustration to see that set back, and trying to think about ways to reduce the levers for that kind of block against the units that we so desperately need across the city. So that was sort of the local context. And then the slightly wider regional context is that both of our neighbors to the north, Cambridge and Somerville, have recently adopted affordable housing overlays. So, we don't like to be shown up in Boston. We're very pleased to have recently set a standard, not just in the region, but nationwide, with the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing zoning relief, which now, others are looking to copy us on. But on the idea of a kind of zoning overlay for deeply affordable units, and 100% affordable developments, we really wanted to figure out how Boston could do something along those lines. So at our last hearing, we had folks from the administration. We also had a number of advocates come and talk about the need for this and just the sort of scale of need for low-income housing in Boston. And I think it's important to emphasize there's been a lot of progress in Boston specifically towards building units over the last decade. And that is important to meeting our overall supply needs. But we just know when you run out the models that it's not going to be enough to trickle down to the, half of Boston workers who make less than $30,000 a year. So you've got to also be building up at the same time. And while DND has been permitting a record number of these, we still just need so much more supply. So anywhere that we have levers in our control as a city to kind of speed the process, I think we've got to be looking at that. So the memo we set around today was kind of in the context of having looked at the Somerville and the Cambridge examples. What we found is, our Boston zoning code is a very particular, unique, special beast. And so we can't really just copy and paste something that another municipality has done, because in order to really align with the way that our zoning and our zoning relief processes work, we kind of have to do something bespoke for Boston. So our idea today was to talk about some of the strategies that have been taken in other places, and kind of categorically. So for instance, there's been efforts on parking relief, setback and open space relief, height and scale increases, expedited review processes, waiving fees. So like a lot of different levers, and also within that, different ways of defining those. And so we wanted to kind of collect up some of those strategies and talk through with our experts from the BPDA and D&D departments, sort of what seems most promising and doable in a Boston context, and what seems more challenging, so that we can then kind of make the next iteration actually be introducing some language, but wanted to have this kind of conceptual conversation first. So sorry, Mr. Chair, I was a little long, but I just wanted to provide some framing of where we are. And again, grateful to everybody for being here.
Hear, hear. No need to apologize. Appreciate your leadership on this incredibly important topic. Very briefly to my colleagues, if we can do like a 1 minute quick hello and introduction, starting with Councilor, in order of appearance, Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor O'Malley, Councilor Bach. Just want to say thank you to the administration team for being here and for their important work on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. Setting a good bar for brevity. Councilor Mejia.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I'm going to follow that suit. I'm very competitive. So I'm glad to be here. Looking forward to the conversation. And thank you, Councilor Bach, for your steadfast conviction on all things that deal with housing justice.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Councilor Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm delighted to be here to talk about this very important issue today. I want to thank all the folks from the administration who are here and look forward to diving in to the discussion this morning. Thank you.
Well said. Thank you. Councilor Essaibi George.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and appreciate everyone's attendance today. Unfortunately, unable to come on camera. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Thank you, Councilor Essaibi George. And we're joined by District 4 Councilor Andrea Campbell. Councilor Campbell, do you have any opening remarks before we jump into the panel?
Yes, just first of all, good morning, everyone. And thank you for this hearing, for bringing this to the floor. Councilor Bach and Councilor O'Malley, really appreciate it. As you can imagine, affordable housing continues to be a major topic of discussion in the city, not only with advocates, but of course, those in the development world, and how we streamline processes to make it easier to build affordable housing, to save costs, and of course, get communities and residents the housing they desperately need is really important. So I appreciate each and every one of you for the work you do, including, of course, folks from the panel or on the panel and from the administration as well, the work you do every day. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilor Campbell. Thank you all my colleagues. So I think we'll get into the panelists, and again, forgive me, I'm not sure if there's a administration lead on this. I don't know if this, Tim, maybe perhaps you want to introduce your colleagues, and then if there's any opening statements, and then we'll just get right into Q&A.
Thank you, Councilor O'Malley, for having us here today. I am the Deputy Director for Policy Development and Research at the Department of Neighborhood Development. We are, of course, the agency that likes to fund all these affordable housing projects, that we would love to see them go smoother and faster. However, most of the discussion today will be based on, zoning principles and approval principles, which are under the aegis of the Boston Planning and Development Agency. So myself and Jessica Boatright, who is our Deputy Director for Neighborhood Housing Development, are here kind of in support and for this discussion. And I will turn it over to Brian Glasscock from the Boston Planning and Development Agency to kind of discuss the BPDA's role and to help us in the rest of this conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Mr. President. Thanks, council members. you know me, I'm all zoning all the time. And I think there's definitely a zoning a component of this larger problem that we need to look at. As we begin to think about it, and I appreciate Councillor Bach's scholarship in this area, because this is deep weeds. But I'd sort of see two issues, main issues that we need to grapple with. The first is, how do we make it easier for affordable housing projects to get through the gauntlet of regulatory reviews, and the ZBA can be a stumbling block. But secondarily, and to the point of the lawsuits and the challenges by abutters, that one may be a zoning issue, or also maybe something more fundamental, and that is when variances are granted, they're granted on the basis of hardship. And I wonder if being able to expand the true meaning of hardship to include affordability, essentially taking away the keys to the courthouse to abutter challenges on something like this, might be something we should run to ground. That by giving somebody, any abutter, the ability to challenge any zoning relief granted, we will continue to fight this fight on affordable housing. Sooner or later, there's going to be somebody that will bring another suit. So I put that out there, and there may be greater legal minds than mine in the room, no doubt. But that might be something worth tracking.
Great. Thank you, Brian. I'm going to return the water bottle gavel to Councillor at Large Michelle Wu, who's joined us, who's technically the chair of the committee. Madam Chair, we've just done brief opening statements from councillors, and then Brian sort of set the stage on sort of the BPDA and some opening thoughts. So the floor, or the gavel, is yours.
Thank you for passing the water bottle. I am needing to get caught up as well. So is there any other comments from the administration panel? I don't know if Jessica or others wanted to chime in as well.
I know Tim was speaking on behalf of DND. Thanks, Councillor.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I'd be happy to start off with some questions if that were.
That would be great. Okay, go for it, Councillor Bach.
Great. So I wonder, and Brian, it's an interesting point about the lawsuits. I think what we also there's a couple things we have to figure out. One is how much the new rule that passed as part of housing choice at the state level, which actually requires people to post bonds in their affordable housing related lawsuits, like kind of how much that's going to apply to our cases, how helpful that is, and trying to think that through. I guess I'm curious. I don't really know how we would redefine hardship to include affordability, unless you're saying that would involve a state law change. I guess my instinct on this is that the reason to do zoning relief that's actually in our code is to have more by right entitlement for these 100% affordable projects, so that they're not seeking as many variances. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Sure. And so just to sort of recount for folks that maybe don't live in the zoning world all the time, there are a couple of sort of a hierarchy of types of zoning relief, essentially, that are granted that allow us to create these projects with 100% affordable. Very large projects on a 1 acre site or larger may be able to use the planned development area process. And in that process, it's essentially like changing the zoning. So you don't give to the abutters the same ability to challenge it as an abutter in court, which is different than granting a variance. And then in our various planning processes, we've worked with the community to sort through this idea of density bonus. So essentially there's 2 levels of zoning, sort of your base zoning, and then if you agree to do a certain contribution of affordable, you'd avail yourself of higher density. And then there's just the straight up zoning variance process. And that's the one that, really makes a project potentially vulnerable to suits by abutters.
Right. Yeah. And so just for folks, just reference who are watching, and I want to allow my council colleagues to ask some questions about this stuff, but the memo that we sent around looked at, I mentioned this, but sort of certainly a density bonus being something that other places have tried. And that, as you say, we've tried in a sort of limited way, which is kind of, a height and scale increase to go along with affordability. Personally, I think that in this context, at least, we would be talking about that for kind of 100% like affordable developments, as opposed to, I think we've had an effort in a few parts of the city to think about, like you just said, driving up the affordability a bit in a market rate development and how that would lead to a density bonus. We haven't done any density bonuses for 100% affordable, have we, anywhere in the city?
No.
On the PDA side? No.
No.
So I guess I'd be curious to know what you think about that. And then the one question I'll lodge additionally to the D&D folks, and then let others sort of follow up with further questions, is, when we were thinking about different places there could be these levers, looking at, do we do parking relief? I feel like often we're sitting there talking about affordable projects and saying this project does not need half a parking spot, a unit because the folks who are going to be in these apartments don't own cars, right? We have those conversations, but we're sort of having them one off. So interested about that, about setbacks, and then about kind of expedited review processes, sort of coordinating more of our department processes together. And then I know that we have occasionally waived fees on the kind of BHA side, but I don't think we do a lot of that on the private affordable housing development side. I would be curious to hear from the D&D folks just which parts of these kinds of things seem like they would really make a difference for the projects that you guys watch go through the pipeline. Because as you say, it's a BPDA process, but you're sort of cheerleading the projects that are getting funded through the affordable housing round. So be curious which, if any of those levers seemed kind of more or less promising to you. So that's two questions. Sorry, that one for the D&D team. And then, back to Brian et al. It sounds like we haven't done 100% affordable density bonuses. What's kind of your thought about that?
Yeah, I think, the part of the challenge is those 100% projects are, each one's a unicorn, and it's really hard to say exactly what kind of zoning relief is going to be required. I think that's probably you sort of touched upon it when you talked about parking relief. So it's citywide parking relief, might not be viable because some neighborhoods, people are going to have cars. So it's going to be really hard I think we're going to have to piece through this neighborhood by neighborhood, sub-district by sub-district, because I don't know that there's too many opportunities for a blanket sort of overlay that will work everywhere. There's always going to be that situation where it has the opposite effect, or it causes some other unforeseen problem. Not that we can't do it. It's kind of painstaking work, and it means working with every community group citywide one at a time to try and move those things forward.
Yeah, I guess. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that, I think, I mean, first, I do want to say, to our BPDA colleagues, I think that within the existing system, D&D and BPDA staff work closely together to try to do what we can within the existing system to help these projects. I just want to lay that out because I know that it takes a lot of work on both of our sides. And I hear what Brian's saying about how there are these neighborhood variations where there are definitely some places where it's harder to think about a parking relief than others. But I mean, to me, I guess what that means is that in some kind of expedited review process could have the biggest sort of blanket impact, because within that you could make nuances if you wanted to for specific neighborhoods, right? But if there just was a way to make sure that affordable projects were treated differently because of their community benefit, then that might be an approach where you could build in some modifications, but at least, you know, the developers and the community and the future recipients would be able to build different expectations into how we could get these projects through. I don't know if Tim wants to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think in terms of the expedited process, the BPDA currently has the power to waive some parts of Article 80 review for affordable projects, although I do not think they've done it of late. They've been, of course, worked hard to get them through the process, but specifically, there have been a couple of projects where they were basically renovations of existing buildings that triggered Article 80. And that was ones where it seemed like those are the ones that we most likely could have given that waiver. In terms of something like parking or some of the other zoning variance issues, as you probably know, once you have one zoning variance, you have to kind of, if there's a zoning variance for the whole project. It's not so simple as if we have a difference on the parking, that solves all the problems in terms of the process. It still has a zoning variance somewhere, and it still has an issue. I think that parking is certainly something that, if that is the one thing that is hanging up the community against the project, that's where, if we have some citywide policy saying that this is what a citywide policy is around parking, it would be very helpful. Of course, we don't want any buildings that have no parking, though, because we also want to have, we almost always have to have at least a little parking for handicap accessibility.
So I can touch, Tim mentions, so good morning, everyone, and thank you for having us today. We do have the ability to waive certain requirements relative to Article 80. The project that Tim references is the Lennox Streets Apartments, which is a BHA-owned property. It was a renovation, and we waived the IAG process and ran a kind of a public meetings. It always comes with, you know, whenever you kind of waive a process, there's always some red flags that do go up. So we're always trying to be sensitive to that. 100% affordable, obviously, when they come in from an Article 80 perspective, where our ears and eyes are always kind of wide open relative to kind of trying to figure out how we can get this through the process in a way that is beneficial to keeping it moving and getting it into the funding round. You know, relative to like the waiving fees and stuff, like that's more of a question that we'd have to kind of get back to you on relative to when we talk, like, you know, the permitting fees at ISD and stuff like that. I think that's a bigger question that we'd have to circle back with you on. But, you know, I think we're today really just as, you know, want to continue to work through this and kind of come up with different ideas and hear kind of some of the different thoughts that can kind of help us think through this. And if there is potential, you know, process changes that we could look at changing, I think we're definitely open to better understanding kind of how we can make these processes more fluid so that they can get into the funding rounds.
And just to circle back on what Jessica started with, you know, you know, I don't want to speak for ISD for sure, but one thing we did do was to fast track small homeowner projects and small business projects by having the Thursday night sessions, which sort of took them, instead of being in the queue with, you know, a 20-story building, you know, they were sort of on their own track, and that loosened things up a lot for them. It made it a lot more manageable for, you know, small, you know, 1 and 2 family homeowner project. They're putting in a dormer or, you know, that extending living space in the basement. They didn't have to wait in the, you know, the 6-month long queue. And maybe that's something we can think about, is expedited review for 100% affordable, so that they're not in the queue with these other projects that have been sort of grinding it out for a while. And that may help, you know, reduce the time.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bach. I want to recognize that Councillor Edwards had joined, and we'll go next to Councillor O'Malley. And just to give a sense of the order for everyone else, Councillor O'Malley will be followed by Councillor Flynn, Mejia, Braden, Essaibi George, Campbell, and then Edwards.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning again, ladies and gentlemen. Brian, I want to follow up on sort of the last point, that the expedited review. Talk a little bit about because I do think the Thursday, I'm old enough to remember when the Tuesday ZBA hearings would last routinely 6, 7, 8 hours long, and I think the Thursday addition for the small projects has been enormously helpful. But flesh that idea out that you just sort of mentioned. Would you consider a third session for deeply affordable, or
well, again, I don't want to try and speak for the ZBA because they have their own staff and they have their own policies and protocols. But I can tell you how the Thursday session works. It's really a subcommittee of the Zoning Board of Appeal that reviews the case and then makes a recommendation to the full board on the following Tuesday. And what they did was it sort of took those small projects, the homeowner projects, out of the big long queue. Gave them a chance to meet under terms that are a lot easier for small homeowners and small business owners to manage, which is the Thursday evening thing. Because there's only a handful of projects, the subcommittee members are able to spend a little more time with them, sort through the issue, make sure that they've covered all the issues, and then they make a recommendation to the full board, which generally ratifies whatever the subcommittee. So something along those lines could potentially speed up the process. If you've got a 4 to 6 month queue for the ZBA, imagine paring that down to maybe 2 months. Because they're able to go through a subcommittee, and it may be that the subcommittee, there's a special subcommittee just for this. If you'll, I feel like this is Jeopardy, and I'm taking obscure enabling references for 2000 here, but one of the components with the enabling legislation change that happened earlier this year was it authorized the ZBA make their own ZBA and the Zoning Commission have the ability to make their own subcommittees and make their own rules. And this is something I would think, and again, I defer to ISD and the city legal team, that the ZBA could consider having a subcommittee to just deal with these affordable housing projects.
I like it, and I think again this is the purpose of this working session, is to kick around these ideas. But as we talk about expediting the process, which is probably the most attractive aspect to the developer who would be looking at a 100% affordable project, allowing for some ad hoc committee rather than just saying we're going to expedite that 4-month process and make it a 2-month process. This gives a little more teeth, a little more certainty to the developer that they will have an opportunity to expeditiously get through the community process. None of us are saying we should abandon the community process. Of course, it exists for a reason, and there are certain there are certainly legal rights that any abutter would have. But when we think about the Pine Street and project, as all of you know, in my 10 years on this body, this was probably the most universally supported major development project in my district. There was certainly parking relief. I don't know how many parking spots it ended up having, but it was a fraction of the number that was needed by law. There was setback relief. Everything went through that we're talking about, but it's still being held up by one abutter, landlord, I should say, not necessarily an abutter who lives there. So I guess as we talk about the Pine Street project, how many other projects are in the pipeline across the city that would be sort of a large scale, 100+ units of deeply affordable currently on the books, or in sort of any, you can use it as liberal an interpretation of in the pipeline as you want. I don't know, Mike, what would you say? How many Pine Street and like projects are currently before?
I mean, Pine Street is definitely unique. I don't know how many we have relative to, actually Jessica or Tim might know, because we just kind of had a funding round.
Let us get back to you in a minute. Let me do some quick research and I can get back.
We're just gonna pull it up real fast.
So sometimes, Counselor, as you know, there's projects that come in at a higher affordability, so say they're around 20% or something like that. But as far as all affordable, they are unique. And then we're also dealing with some of the BHA redevelopments that are introducing market housing with the preservation and new built BHA housing. So that's kind of another layer on this. But as far as all affordable, yeah, I don't think we have a huge pipeline on that. But
No.
back to us.
And another reason why we want to make it easier, not harder for I asked the question knowing the answer would be probably very small, if any, on this scale. But I think it underscores the need to offer every incentive and carrot as we can to a would-be developer, and that's
yeah. So I can answer that in terms of
Yeah.
what's in the pipeline. It's actually is a small number. So I'll start at 74 units, just because it's sort of
Sure.
it's sort of large enough. The William Barton Rogers Middle School, which is in Hyde Park, which is 74 units, is a D&D owned building. The J.J. Carroll with 77 units is a BHA property. It's additional units on a BHA property.
So it's
Old
actually
Colony.
a total, sorry, JJ Carroll is
ahead.
actually a total of about 140 because it's 77 it's half replacement, half new. Go on.
Oh, thank you.
Where's
77
that-
plus 64.
Sorry, where's that, Jessica? I know Rogers is in Hyde Park. Where's the Carroll?
It's in Brighton.
Right.
We have BHA Old Colony Phase 6, which has 134 new units. Those are mostly a rebuild. We have 290 Tremont, which is on hold at the moment. That is the BPDA owned parcel in Chinatown that was proposed to have 168 units. And the Mary Ellen McCormick, the rebuild there in South Boston, and of course the rebuild of the Charlestown public housing project as well are the big ones. So they're primarily that size. So
Can I add a couple of them? Can I
Sure.
add a couple more?
Sure.
So I would add, well, if Tim had said that just to go a little bit below 70, we also have 2147 Washington Street in Nubian Square, which will be 62 units, and 1599 Columbus Ave in Roxbury, which will be 65 units. And then currently going through the permitting process right now is 140 Clarendon Street, which will be 210 units. So
These are all 100%.
these are all 100%. Yep.
And that was a good mix of new buildings as well as a lot of retrofits in certain examples, like the Carroll, and I would also include Mildred Haley in this as something.
Yeah, Mildred Haley would be in the next category. Yeah, Mildred Haley.
Just on those BHA ones, and I know the counselors that are involved, I know particularly Councilor Edwards with the one Charlestown, they are introducing, and Council Flynn over in South Boston, they are introducing market rate units, which makes this a little more complicated relative to when you think about a permitting, a streamlined permitting mechanism, in the sense of they are introducing more density, and that will increase traffic, urban design, height, and stuff like that. So some of the three that were mentioned, Mary Ellen McCormick, one Charlestown, which is the Bunker Hill BHA, and the one Matt you just mentioned. They are introducing market rate units, all at different levels relative to kind of scale, but each one of those is introducing market rate units, which kind of puts it on its own path relative to review, and it's more of a standard Article 80 because the density is kind of being viewed as a kind of a large scale review. So I just want to make sure we note that.
Fair point, Mike. And back to sort of the matter at hand, I think that we should be talking about levels of relief. Not unlike a lot of the goals, which I very much support in the JP Rocks corridor study, which would allow for certain levels of density increase based on an affordability that would hit 20, 25, perhaps even 30%. So we can do both here. We could allow for certain incentives for a developer to hit those far exceeding IDP numbers, and then the higher the number goes, the more incentives and carrots, so to speak, that we offer them, which is why I think this is an exciting conversation. I think Councillor Bach has identified a number of things that we can do within our purview as it relates to density, setback restrictions, as it relates to parking guidelines, as it relates to what the speed would look like. So I'm going to wrap it up for this round of questions here, more from my colleagues, but appreciate everyone spending some time with us today. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor O'Malley. Councilor Flynn is next.
Thank you, Councilor Wu. Tim, could you just give me an update? I believe you mentioned the Tremont Street project. What is the latest on that?
I will have to defer to Jessica. She's probably more close to that situation.
And I, you know, that is that is still working through the community process. So, you know, it may have been, I may have jumped the gun, and, you know, I think Tim was naming projects that are further down in our pipeline, whereas that one is very much still in the early community process. But we're working with the team.
Okay. Could we speak offline about that?
Absolutely.
I don't want to see any projects in my district stalled for any reason, especially affordable housing projects. I have the most public housing of any district in the city, and I'm proud of that, but I also want to continue building more affordable housing throughout my district. So the last thing I want is anything stalled in my district. And if anything is stalled, I want to know about it so I can work to get it resolved.
Great.
So obviously with the recession here taking place, but I don't want anyone to use any excuses that we're not building affordable housing because of a recession. That's not going to happen in my district. So I just want to let developers know that I'm not going to accept that going forward. That's all I have, Councilor O'Malley. Thank you. Councilor Wu, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. Next up is Councilor Mejia.
Hi, good morning. Wow, Flynn is going in these days. Y'all better watch out. I love it. Thank you, Councilor Flynn, for all of that. So I just have a few questions. I'm just curious, how are we currently defining quote unquote hardship in the city? Just want to get a real clear sense of what hardship looks like and how we're defining that. And then I also am curious if we could talk a little bit about usually people who need affordable housing the most are not at the table in these development spaces, and how can we make sure that we're centering the voices of the people in the process? Would just really love to hear what that looks like for y'all. And then I think a lot of people want to be a part of the process to that point when it comes to zoning, but often get lost in the vocabulary and difficult terminology. So I'm curious, how can we be a little bit more intentional about reaching out to community in a way that they can understand? And not to say that, you know, we can't take the time to Google something or look at a thesaurus, but I'm wondering, how can we just like make all of this so much more easier for everyday folks to really understand what all of this jargon means, so that we can organize and speak on these matters with a little bit more of confidence. That's a lot. So whoever wants to go first.
Councilor, I think your first point about hardship, I'll take a crack at that one. You know, when we talk about hardship in the context of a zoning board of appeal, you know, generally the hardship is when due to the size or shape of the parcel that the development's proposed on, or soil conditions, or some other physical feature of the property, it makes it hard to develop it, get a reasonable, return on any investment there, because it's difficult to build on. And that's a very narrow definition of hardship, but it's built into the enabling legislation, and it's been part of zoning law, since the beginning of time. And that makes it challenging when the Board of Appeal gets a good project that it wants to approve and needs zoning relief. So sometimes they sort of stretch that definition and grant variances for a wide range of reasons on deserving projects. And that's where the legal challenge comes in, because then an abutter can potentially challenge a project in court, and it's very hard for courts to uphold it if the board hasn't pointed to those kinds of real hardships.
So to that, Brian, I'm just curious, like, does that have any reason why we're not building affordable in the Seaport and other areas? Does that have something to do with why we are being priced out of certain neighborhoods? At least we're not able to build affordable in certain spaces. Does that have anything to do with it?
I don't think so. I think it's, and I'll defer to my other BPDA colleagues. Mr. Christopher probably, could speak to that. But some of these larger Article 80 projects, particularly ones where they have to build the infrastructure. So not only they're building the building, they have to build the streets and the sewer systems and so on because it didn't exist before. The Seaport's a classic example of that. Very high land acquisition costs, high infrastructure costs. Everything about it is expensive to build down there. And as a result, we don't see as much affordable as we might if it were an infill project somewhere else. But I'll defer to Mr. Christopher or Tim Davis on those.
Yeah, I kind of struggle with that whole notion, but Tim, I have nothing but love for y'all. So help me understand why that is.
Well, one of the largest issue, the big issue in the Seaport District is that we don't own any of the land that we can build housing on. Obviously, the BPDA owns big chunks of the Marine Industrial Park, but there are state laws that regulate what can be used with that land. And so that's the major reason why we have not been able to build 100% affordable buildings in the Seaport, is because the land values have been too high for affordable housing developers to compete with private developers, and we don't own any of the land. As you can see, the large projects that we discussed earlier were almost all on BHA or D&D owned properties. That's where we've been able to really get scale, has been on our own properties.
Okay, thank you for that. So I'm just curious, I want to be super mindful of time and everyone else's, but I'm just curious about what are we doing to center the voices of the people, and what can we do to better articulate in ways that everybody can understand what it is that we're articulating.
I mean, I think the more, obviously the more we can go out and engage separate and apart from projects, right? More, obviously we do it through our planning initiatives, but I think the more we can have conversations around what is affordable housing, what does it mean? It is a very quirky, subject matter in the sense of once you get into the weeds into it. So I think the more we can do that separate and aside from our, from a project base. I think what happens when we are introducing projects in neighborhoods, and all of you know this because you're out in the neighborhoods, that sometimes it gets lost in the conversation around the specific, whether it's a setback or parking or height or density, and really the mission of what we're trying, what the developer, if it's 100% affordable, is trying to do gets lost. So I think the more we can have conversations and kind of educate folks around kind of what it is we're doing, and kind of what the housing goals are for the city, and kind of the big initiatives we have around some of these projects. I think that is a way to really kind of separate the conversation from individual projects, but more of just kind of a broader policy discussion.
Thank you for that. And my last question before Councilor Wu shuts me down with my mic here. I'm curious, is that okay, Councilor Wu? Could I ask one more question?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you. So I do really appreciate that, Mike. I'm curious, have you ever done a survey of the community in terms of how they're experiencing development? What are some of the initial points of tension, and what we can do to better engage them? I mean, I think education is important, but I'm just curious, have you guys ever considered doing a full assessment and getting input from the people to hear what this feels like for them and what we can learn about what they have to say in terms of how we can make it better?
As far as a broad approach, we there's definitely been a lot of conversation as of late of kind of taking the BPD on the road and going into the communities and really having a conversation, like I mentioned, separate and apart from projects. When we get into the planning initiatives, we really do deep dives in kind of what all this means, right? So what does parking mean? What does affordable housing mean? What does open space mean? What does heightened density mean? And try to really educate the community as much as possible and bring the experts across the city agencies into these different rooms, or for now Zooms, and really talk through kind of what is planning and ultimately what is the goal. So, I think it's something that as we continue to think about it, we do feel like these conversations are a lot more important. It's relative to kind of surveys and stuff like that. I don't have any specifics on that, but I do think it's something that could be helpful to kind of help shape some of our conversations as it relates to kind of the things I mentioned about kind of going out into the communities.
Thank you for that.
Can I just say that, one thing that has been a benefit of the new ways that we have to do outreach over the last year, it feels like there's been mostly drawbacks to not being able to be in person, because so many of these things have to happen with in-person conversations. But one thing that's happened for us on a project level is that we've been able to piggyback some developer communications about specific projects onto neighborhood association meetings, so that we're not just using D&D's outreach capacity, but we're also really relying on local groups to go to where people are going already. It's not we haven't figured it all out by any means, and there's lots more work to do. And I think your survey idea is really good. I think there's a lot of things we could be doing, but we are talking internally about how can we sort of continue to build on the ways that pandemic outreach has forced us to try to be more strategic and thoughtful about going to places that people already might be at least virtually going to, rather than trying to recreate spaces.
Yeah, and just to look back to, I can only really speak for the sort of the planning division part of the BPDA, but we have a much more robust community engagement section than we've ever had before. A few new staff, and Jessica's right. This has forced us to re-examine how we engage with the community. But pre-COVID, we were having lunch with planners and neighborhood walks with planners, even when we didn't have an ongoing planning initiative in that neighborhood, and even though there wasn't a project in front of us at the time, we sort of felt like the time to have good, establish good relationships with folks is not when we're in the middle of decision making, but when there's sort of nothing, no burning issues on the table. And we tried to continue that in the virtual world by having lots of those kinds of virtual engagements where people can just ask questions, and we can sort of share, what we're thinking and get that kind of feedback.
Yeah, no, I appreciate those efforts. Thank you so much. I think that I heard you mention lunch. I hope that you are also considering how you feed the folks who are participating in these meetings, not just the planners. No, I'm just joking.
We're not too long before we got shut down, we did have over in East Boston, we had pupusas with planners. So we worked pretty hard to find the good food in every neighborhood.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Wu. I'm so sorry I took up so much more of your time. I don't have any more further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mejia. Next up is Councillor Braden.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, everyone. This is a very important conversation, as I said earlier. I'm really excited to think that my Christopher is so excited talking about planning initiatives. I'm salivating perspective having a district-wide conversation about Alston Brighton. So I think with regard to parking issue, very often we are asked by developers to reduce the amount of parking because it is an added cost. But I think one of the critical issues in depending, and it's a neighborhood by neighborhood conversation, but one of the critical issues is to make sure that if you're reducing parking, that you have access to really reliable and affordable mass transit that works on a schedule that reflects the working hours of people who are going to live in the project. So in that part of the neighborhood. So evening hours, late third shift schedules for transit is really important. And I really feel as well that it's really frustrating here in Alston Brighton. We've built 7,000 or in the process of planning or permitting or building 7,000 units of new housing in the last 10 years. And so often we talk about it's affordable, and it's the IDP policy of 13%. Is what the most of what we've been getting is 13%. And that has been pegged at 70% of the area median income, while in Alston Brighton, the median income in Alston is 45 to 50% of the AMI, and in Brighton is slightly higher. So really what we're building is, essentially totally unaffordable for the folks who actually live here. So I'm really aggressively about mixed income developments is sort of critical, and having a much higher proportion of deeply affordable middle income housing alongside market rate has to be the way to go, because we're incrementally building deeply affordable housing on the very little available land that we have left out here, and then the rest of it is sort of get in the ring and fight it out with developers to see if you can get them to 17% of the of an IDP, and then maybe haggle with them to get a few units at 50% of the AMI. And they offset that with going into workforce housing, which is 120 to 150% of the area median income. So it's really like scratching around and fighting for breadcrumbs when we really need a much more aggressive approach to mixed income development, a higher proportion of deeply affordable and higher proportion of middle income, and then the market rate piece on top of that. That's the icing on the cake. And I know I feel that is a recession-proof approach to housing. We have hundreds of units of luxury housing in Alston Brighton lying empty right now because of this recession. If we had a more inclusive approach to truly mixed income development, then we would be housing and mindfulness about the sort of people that we're housing, like housing for families, housing for artists, housing for retirees in the same community. And right now we're sort of segregating people out with deeply affordable housing for really low income elders. We have housing for young professionals. We need to start integrating it and building a living, dynamic, sustainable community of intergenerational people living together. I don't know what I'm talking. Maybe I'm being a total idealist about this, but I really think we have to really aggressively think about mixed income housing. Deeply affordable is essential, but we have to really find a way to get to developing projects that are mixed income, that are sustainable, resilient, and equitable going forward. And that's more of a statement than a question, but I'd love to know, are there examples of that sort of a project that have succeeded? Like I hear people talk about Tent City in the South End, that was a project in the past that worked. Maybe we need to go back to that model, but I'd love to hear from you folks about what you've seen work and what doesn't, and what am I out of touch? Am I totally off base and thinking that might not work?
I think I'll jump in here, Councillor Braden. Tent City is a mixed income project. It was built on public land.
Tim, hold on. Tim, we're getting a lot of feedback from you. I don't know if there's another device on, or can you try one more time speaking?
This Tim, how is it? Is it bad?
We can understand you. There's just like a ringing in the background, so I don't know.
Okay, I'm not sure what that is. So I'll make it brief then because of the ringing. The Tent City is a successful mixed income project. I think the versions of that we're doing today are examples such as the work that is being done at the Mildred Haley Apartments, that are being done at Amory Street, that involve, those are partnerships between the BHA, community builders, Urban Edge, and JP&BC, and they are really committed to doing truly mixed income projects. And those are the examples that we're doing today. And again, it's being built on publicly owned land. In terms of encouraging private market projects to do that, we are hopeful for that. We also are hopeful that as the implementation of the new affirmatively furthering fair housing zoning process rolls out, that will be a way to encourage more private market developers to include a broader range of incomes, both for very low, moderate income, and even middle income units within, the projects that also have market rate units. So that's what we're hopeful for that. I don't know if there's anyone else from our team who'd like to respond.
I would just add on the good examples, the stuff going on in Nubian Square as well, which is also publicly owned land. I think that is a big factor in a lot of that discussion. But the Nubian Square, there was several parcels put out that are a third. So a third deeply affordable, a third affordable, and then a third market. So I think as we work through this, I think we try to take the kind of, as we learn and implement that in the public disposition. When we're doing it, we have full control. On the broader IDP policy and in that, I would kind of defer to D&D or Michelle to kind of weigh in on the AMIs and how we view that relative to kind of workforce housing and deeply affordable housing, kind of how we work through all that.
So, I mean, in terms of the AMIs are set through the inclusionary development policy for those units. And I think that there will be certainly some review of that in the next year as we hope to kind of work towards whether, and this is really a BPDA's mission, will have to be, lead the process in terms of how and where to put IDP into the zoning. And then there could be a rethink about IMIs in concert with the new administration.
I think as well, in exploring ways in which we can do private and nonprofit development, partnering with private developers to, and make that concept of a density bonus work, in the sense that I think we're getting a lot of added density out here, and we're not getting any benefit for in terms of more affordable housing. So I think, I'm hoping that with this new administration, we'll see some new initiatives and more money to really help explore new territory and develop new models for how, and maybe dust off some of the old models so that we can really get to a place where we're consistently building mixed income housing that will house more of our population. And then the premium on luxury development, like, I think we almost need like take a pause on all this luxury stuff and start building housing for the people who really need it. Like, we have a 17,000 waiting list in CDC in Alston, Brighton for affordable housing, and it's just what we're doing. I know you folks are working really hard, and I really appreciate that, and you're doing innovating in ways that no other municipality in the country is doing, but I still think we've a ways to go before we get there. Anyway, these are all more statements than questions. Thank you so much for your work, and I'll continue to listen to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Braden. Next up is Councillor Essaibi George.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm unfortunately not in a place where I can fully engage in question and dialogue for this hearing, but I have been listening and will follow up just via email with some questions for the panel. I am grateful for my colleagues' questions today. It's been very thoughtful and engaging. I love the idea that came up with Tim and Councillor O'Malley around, looking at an opportunity to add another session or another hearing opportunity, especially for the 100% affordable developments and projects and proposals. So I will follow up with the panel, and I will continue to listen into this morning's hearing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Let me just check my list. Next up is Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Councillor Wu, and thank you to the panelists for all of your incredible work, not of course just on this issue, but so many others. Many of my questions were asked and answered by my colleagues, and fully support the cutting of red tape and bureaucracy and streamlining processes in order to be able to build more affordable housing. But also to Councilor Braden's point, which continues to also come up in every conversation, just being intentional, of course, on what we're building. As we're building more affordable housing, how are we building more units, not just rental, but home ownership opportunities for families? 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms, single family homes, et cetera, critically important. It comes up all the time. Intergenerational housing, the same thing. There's a great project, of course, in Roxbury. We've been trying to activate city-owned vacant lots for intergenerational housing project with that same developer, who actually happens to be a person of color. And so there are a lot of folks in my current district, Dorchester, Mattapan, but I also know in other neighborhoods in the city that are looking to downsize, but not go into assisted living, right? They want to move right in their neighborhood, stay in their neighborhood, but be in a place where they can interact with folks who are of a different demographic, which is create more community. And so I think the intergenerational housing is a great opportunity to think about how we expand that and be more intentional on projects playing a role there, because then it frees up these seniors' homes. And through some creative planning and ideas, we can make sure that they go to folks who want to stay in the city, who maybe are in public housing or in a current rental, but need a home. So there's been some creative things I think community's done to connect some of these senior homes where seniors are moving out to folks who are in need. And when I say creative, setting a pricing point that is affordable, frankly, for folks in the community. So just lifting some of those up based on what my colleague said. Maybe this isn't really the right hearing, but I do think as we talk about processes and doing better with process, I've been thinking about this quite a bit on once the affordable housing units are built, once we actually have affordable projects on the market and where we all agree they are indeed affordable and at pricing points that people can afford and they are new, how long it takes to get people into those units. I had a developer who lives in the city who prioritizes, I think, maybe all of what he does is affordable, just continue to be frustrated on how long it can take through the lottery processes, et cetera, to get folks into those units. And in some instances, it can take years, right? Where these units are sitting vacant when we know that there are folks in need. And so I know there's been some work done to streamline processes and all of you have been doing great work. I mean, Mike, we talk quite a bit, right? So I think that is another critical piece to this conversation too, how we streamline processes, cut red tape to get folks into those affordable units once they're built quickly. We shouldn't have units that are affordable sitting vacant for 2 years. And in one particular example, it was almost 2 years, which is just astounding. And so I'm adding that to this conversation because I think that is critically important too. We can build it quickly, but if we don't get our folks into the housing units, that's a problem. So I don't necessarily have any questions. I guess it's more comments and appreciate the work you guys are doing. Mike, congratulations on the baby. And just appreciate everything you guys are doing. And we'll stay in contact with the makers on this, but also on the other pieces around getting folks actually into the units. And I know there's a hearing later today on IDP, so looking forward to that as well. Thank you all. Thank you, Councilor Wu.
Thank you. Okay, and then next up is Councilor Edwards.
Thank you very much. I heard baby, so again, congratulations. I think it's wonderful. I would encourage you to bring said baby on screen, and when you can, I think it helps. You'll note that it definitely changes the mood, tone, and everything. Not
Yeah,
that
it depends how tough the questions get, Councilor. I have them sitting on the backs, just in case.
They just hold the baby up as defense mechanism, calm everybody down. I kind of wanted to make sure I kind of put in some buckets, my questions and thoughts about this. First, the first one is, I think if we're working through this from the understanding that housing is a public good, right, and a public necessity, right, then I think that we should think about it in three ways, and using our zoning, which we have, right, for for civil rights and for affirmatively furthering for housing, marrying the two, we've used zoning to get and advance other initiatives or moral points or moralities of the city that we have adopted. So the other point is, I completely agree with being able that an increase in affordability should also result in a decrease in red tape. And that it should be that perfect kind of balance that we're finding. And it should be a clear policy that is citywide, because we're doing it. Technically, each project by project, we come to the table and try to leverage and get more out of the developer. But I think what this would do, or if zoning amendment or some sort of policy would make it almost by citywide, this is the guarantee. So I do support that. I think there's a couple areas where I'd like to see how this could be beyond, or how this could be interpreted in terms of ownership versus rental. And I'm curious, and maybe we could talk about how we leverage and get more affordable housing for folks to own, and also decrease red tape in that process. That's one. And maybe that could be just simply when developers come through and they're going to do a bunch of condos, they have decreased red tape and decreased zoning requirements, because they're going to be overwhelmingly affordable. So I just want to make sure part of our conversation is about ownership, not just rental. I think this is a problem in terms of bridging the wealth gap. We need to make sure that there are more owners that are people of color, that are women, that are single family or headed household, and not just assume that rental properties or affordable rents are going to help bridge the wealth gap. And then I'm curious, I wanted to also note that I think what's key in this policy analysis is how the city starts, because what I found that the city is able to do is when the city owns the land, you can leverage the most, right? In terms of affordability, you brought up one Charlestown or the Bunker Hill housing development. You brought up, I mean, you could talk about Dudley, I think in that area on some of the lots, we got a third. So when opportunities strike or come up for the city to own, why aren't we purchasing more so that we could turn around and leverage this? For example, Loftel in East Boston, is up for auction apparently on the 14th. And that is, we talked about this in the hearing on high-end blight, actually, that Councillor Campbell and Councillor O'Malley put on. And now that same mess is up for auction. And it's starting at $150,000 in case anyone is curious, and with mortgage bids to be due. But it's a huge building that is empty. And that is, I'm wondering, why isn't the city able to come in and purchase, or at least start to compete to purchase buildings so that we could turn around and do exactly what we want here? I know that we, as the BPDA, we are managing city-owned lots and leveraging and getting certain things and developing what the city already had, but why aren't we in the business of acquiring more so that we can do that? And finally, yes, for everyone's comments about IDP policy, we're having that hearing today, where we're going to be discussing increasing the percentage, and we're going to be discussing its applicability to units or buildings less than 10 units. We're going to be discussing all the things about IDP. So those are my kind of comments and questions. Again, supporting completely a citywide policy about an increase in affordability resulting in a decrease in red tape, or requiring zoning variances. And then the rental versus ownership, how we're going to make sure that they're part of this conversation. And then I saw, Mike, you're ready to answer about why we aren't purchasing up more things to make sure that we aren't getting and leveraging the power of the purse of the city to also leverage that to either, when it's developed, get more affordable units.
Yeah, I mean, I can touch and our D&D can probably weigh in on there. And I know that this is definitely something that has come up in our conversations relative to trying to get at the heart of some of the affordability issues. Obviously, land being a premium, and that presenting its own challenges relative to kind of being able to, what is our purchase power? I think we have, I think I would defer to I hate to defer, but it's a broader question that is a good question, that is not a newer question. Obviously, we have the history of urban renewal, and I know there's a lot of negative history associated with it, but there was also a lot of positive history relative to what we were able to do with land we acquired. When that all happened, there was federal money that came with that, so we had the ability to really have purchasing power. I think now it's more or less kind of understanding kind of where we're at on our balance sheet and what we have the ability to kind of go out and pursue, and where the opportunities are. And I think, I would have to circle back with you on that, but it's definitely something that has been talked about. As of late of is this potentially something that we could look at doing?
Great. In terms of the 100% affordable units on city land, Bunker Hill lots, for example, I understand that that's going to be a potential development that is owned by the city. Councilor Braden brought up that she really believes in mixed income. I do too as well. And I'm hoping maybe that's an example of where we can integrate ownership, right? Affordable units. Because if you're going to make it 100% affordability, I'm concerned about concentrations of poverty, generally and honestly. I do believe in mixed income, and I do believe in ownership. So I'm wondering if the city could come up with a plan for any part that, for at least Charlestown or that particular lot, that there's 100%. If it's going to be 100%, it'll be ownership as well, because it's city owned property. I think
we see. I mean, we're going to continue to work through the plan Charlestown, but we see the Bunker Hill lots as a huge opportunity to do creative housing, relative to getting at some of the stuff that the private market can't do. So we're not there yet, but we know we'll be working closely with you and the community relative to kind of figuring out what is the right fit there. And your comment is heard about the home ownership.
Well, and I do just want to throw in that, on the city-owned parcels in Nubian Square, there is a mix of rental and home ownership. Your point is very well taken, and it is the 4 D&D owned parcels have a large amount of rental housing, but 3 of the projects have significant home ownership, including one parcel that is 100% home ownership. So we did open up for a mix of that, and I don't think there's certainly no reason on D&D's part why we would prior to community process and to really understanding a site, sort of from an absolute values, not value of the land, but value for types of housing. We always go into a community process around this piece of D&D owned property, interested in the neighborhood's feeling about need for rental versus homeownership, and open to either or. So I think it's a really great point to be looking at some of these really large parcels. And I think we can build on some of what we've done in Nubian Square in terms of doing a mix of rental and homeownership. And I do want to add, on the acquisition side, I'm glad that Mike talked to BPDA acquisition capacity and thoughts. But as you know well, Councilor Edwards, we have had, we have an acquisition program out of D&D that's been primarily focused on rental units. We are having some internal conversations about how we can think about homeownership through that program, because it's just structured financially better right now for rental, but we know that there's an interest in doing both. We also have city funds in an acquisition program that's administered by CDAC, which is a quasi-public agency. They leverage the city investment with private capital so that it's a larger fund. But those funds, it's officially called a vacant land acquisition fund, but we can use those funds for buildings that are not currently housing that. So a building like the one you're talking about, where the use might be changed, nonprofits have been able to use those for acquisitions. So that's been a nice partner to our acquisition opportunity program. All that to say that D&D is very interested in and has really prioritized our ability to participate in acquisitions as a funder to a, to a third party who will privately own and manage that affordable housing in exchange for an income restriction and agreements about affordability and all that. But that we share your concerns and recognize that,
But
the
Jessica-
moment is always now.
Yeah. So are you guys going to work with the local nonprofit and CDAC funds to look at the Loftel?
So no one has contacted me about this particular property to date, but as soon as we finish this hearing,
I'll send you the legal notice that was in the
yeah, that
Globe.
would be great. That would be great. I'd love
February.
to look into it more.
Auction is April 14th. The last thing I wanted to say is, I think where another area where I would love for and we discussed this, I think, in other meetings, but I wanted to say this out for this moment as well, where creative housing is getting ahead of our zoning, and then we question whether our IDP policies and housing policies apply. For example, when it comes to floating houses, right? I think that I would really like to see D&D and BPDA get so far ahead so that it's very clear in a blanket statement, residential use and housing, building over whatever amount of units, in whether it's floating, I don't know if it's a gondola, whatever we're going to do, like the trucks that they're, whatever creative form of it, IDP needs to apply after a certain square footage. And that
I think we just lost sound from Councillor Edwards.
You did?
We can hear you.
No, we can hear you.
Just you, Braden. Just so I would like for, and I brought this up before with Rich because we were talking about waterfront, but I'm bringing it up now. Can we just go ahead and commit to IDP should apply to all residential at certain points, certain heights or certain square footage, period, and linkage, period. But more, since we're talking about residential, because their plans are put out, they're beautiful plans, and then they're like, I don't know if affordable housing applies to us. It absolutely should, and I just would like for those regulations to be very clear upfront as well. Sorry, Councillor Wu, I know I took a little longer than my other colleagues.
Thank you so much. Anyone else have final comments to what Councillor Edwards was saying from the administration? Good. Okay, I have one question, and then I know some colleagues have a second round, and then we want to get Jesse in on the conversation as well. Jesse Kansen-Beninoff. Okay, so let's see. I just wanted to understand some of the learnings from the planning initiatives over the last couple of years. I know, for example, there's been some work into density bonuses or thinking about Plan.ab, JP Rocks. What are some of the takeaways from, related to focusing on the topic that we're talking about today? What are some of the takeaways coming out of those two planning initiatives or pilots? And, are those basically considered finalized with what they are, or will they end up being codified more into zoning, or what more in these two particular cases, and what can be generalized from them?
So I think, by and large, they're, so as far, we have not made the decision to bring them both to zoning. They were kind of two different variations of planning relative to kind of how one was, so this Plan South Boston was based off of a density bonus that really unlocked some significant height and density that was able to unlock affordable housing, but also public realm, affordable commercial space. Whereas in JP Rocks, there was a bigger conversation around, neighborhood preservation. And a part of that is due to Plan South Boston was a light industrial corridor, whereas JP Rocks has a whole different, it has a bunch of different areas it touches relative to industrial, relative to kind of existing neighborhood fabric. So I think, that planning is very difficult, and to get to consensus is very difficult. And trying to balance everything in order to make a plan that works and that actually unlocks development is one of the bigger challenges. And that's kind of why we haven't moved on the zoning, is because we're still kind of evaluating that, because we've seen some, we're seeing some traces of development in both corridors. It's not it's not a waterfall in the sense of kind of unlocking. These things do take time, but so I think it really, the big high level things I would say is that this is difficult, and the balancing of what, the community and the activists want versus kind of what can be built is always the challenge. And I think we're always trying to work to get to that point. And both of those in both of those instances present those kind of two areas that we're continuing to work through.
Anyone else on that question? Do you, I'm just curious because it feels like it was multiple years of meetings and process, and we're still sort of working through it at this stage. Is it something that you would recommend or think about in other places across the city, or, even just with two corridors? It's just been a lot of residential energy as well, with all the community groups, and just to kind of see another set of guidelines. I think we hear remnants of this with the 100 acres plan and Fort Point Seaport area a lot, where there was a whole lot of energy that went into planning, setting aside, even, trying to codify some pieces of it. And then it just kind of hasn't matched up with the actual rules in terms of implementing and doing a lot of the streamlining that we've been talking about in different points of our conversation today.
Well, just to mention one quick thing on that, and that's that with the change to the enabling legislation, it puts another tool in the toolbox, namely, being able to have actual inclusionary zoning itself. And so it may change how we use things like density bonuses, rather than have to have that sort of carrot. We can build it directly in, and that's something that I think we're thinking about. All day, every day, as we're looking at these planning initiatives going on. So it changes slightly that our approach, but density bonus is still I think a viable tool in some cases.
Yeah, and I would just, the guidelines that were passed both in JP Rocks and Plant South Boston are the guidelines that the developers are following when they come in. Now, them not being, to your point, them not being kind of in zoning does allow flexibility. I think sometimes flexibility in our end can help with progress relative to certain initiatives. I think we've kept an open mind to that. But just to be, those are strategic corridor planning studies. And as you're aware, we're doing planning in Mattapan and East Boston, kind of full neighborhood planning scales, whereas these were kind of focused on nodes. That we're seeing a lot of development. So, I think as we continue to look at planning, we're always kind of looking at how it can evolve, how we can look at it differently. Ultimately, our end goal is always to get to zoning, but trying to get to that consensus to be able to move to zoning is always the challenge.
Oh, Michelle, did you want to say something?
No, I may have taken myself off by accident.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I'm seeing interest in second round from a lot of counselors. So I, in consultation with our co-sponsors here, let's bring Jesse into the conversation to make a statement, and then we can go to second round and incorporate Jesse into that as well. Is that, Councilor Braden, is that okay with your time schedule today?
That's fine. I'm going to have to jump off in a few minutes, but please go ahead.
Oh, why don't you ask your question then first? Jesse, do you mind for just a few minutes? Okay, and then I know Kenzie and Matt and I have more questions as well. So Councilor Braden, go ahead, and then we'll go to Jesse.
There's a couple of things. One thing we're bumping into here that Harvard is a significant landowner, and they are ground leasing large pieces of their holdings to developers. And when we talk to developers about the potential for home ownership, which is a big priority here in Alston Brighton. In Alston, the home ownership is around 9%, and in Brighton it's about 21%. So we're very, very low in terms of home ownership. But the developers turn around and say, well, we have a ground lease from Harvard, or we have a ground lease from the Catholic Church, so we cannot do home ownership. And I know it may be more difficult to do home ownership, but I don't think that should be an impediment. And So that's something I think we need to dig deeper into as we go further into these conversations. The other point I wanted to make with regard to red tape was, and it's discouraging to hear about IDP units that are sitting vacant years after they have been constructed, and that folks who really need to get into those units aren't in them. So I really feel we need to do a little forensic investigation into what exactly the problem is. But I'm also hearing from folks who work in the nonprofit sector, who are landlords, and also from professionals who work in the real estate industry, that the red tape around this processing a Section 8 applicant is onerous and is discouraging and frustrating, and that it means that they have units available as well, that they have units that they would like to lease, or that the Section 8 process is cumbersome, fraught with red tape. And again, I think that, we think we need to maybe do a bit of a forensic expedition into figuring out what red tape can we dispense with in those contexts. And one issue might be with regard to inspection of units before a tenant moves in, make sure that's done in a timely manner. But there should really be no way that we are fighting for IDP units and they're sitting vacant for 2 years. Like, that is just crazy. We fight really hard to get those units, and there's folks who really desperately need to have them. So we need to make sure make sure that we can find some solutions to that problem. And those are really the 2 points I wanted to make about how leaseholding in the city, and also trying to spout and improve the Section 8 process and the delivery of IDP units to the folks who really need them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Braden. Any reactions to that?
I just want to say really heard, and I think sometimes our challenge in the city is that there are different people, have vouchers from different places, and sometimes that makes it, difficult to track. But all I can say is, of course, if you ever hear from someone directly who's having trouble, that, that they should always reach out to us to see if we can support. It doesn't solve the more macro problem that I know that you're talking about, that I really feel alongside you, but I just wanted to be sure that everyone knows that we, especially our Office of Housing Stability, helps folks every day, and are always happy to do that while we try to deal with the bigger, broad policy issues.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, over to Jesse.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Wu, and members of the council. I want to say also, again, thank you to Councillors O'Malley and Bach for getting this conversation started in Boston. I have been very interested and appreciate the opportunity to participate. I didn't realize I am perhaps the only member of the public speaking today, so perhaps that affords me a little bit more authority than I'm worthy of, but I appreciate the opportunity. So I'm mostly responding to the document. I know there's been a lot of great comments from councilors and the administration so far. I'm mostly responding to the document that followed up from the hearing last year, looking at different ways that other communities are doing this. And I want to say, first of all, like I said in the hearing last year, I think we all agree that affordable housing is a priority across the city of Boston. And as such, we need to make sure we have more affordable homes in every neighborhood. And so, I heard Councillor Edwards mentioning this, and perhaps others did before I was able to jump on. This needs to be a citywide conversation, which it is, and I'm grateful for that, to make sure we have affordable homes that can be built in every neighborhood. In terms of the document that was provided and the models from other cities, I think it's a great menu of options. I think it's critical. Well, let me just step back. For those who don't know, my name is Jesse Kansen-Benenov. I am the incoming executive director of Abundant Housing Massachusetts. And I've spent many years working in affordable housing development, both in Boston and in the Boston suburbs, presently at Benabrith Housing in Brighton. So I bring both the knowledge of an affordable housing developer and an advocate to this conversation. So as I was starting to say, I think it's important to look at both the underlying zoning and the process of creating affordable housing, because I think both the zoning, which regulates what and how things can be built, as well as the process for getting them built, are both what make the creation of affordable homes in the city of Boston difficult at times, and not just Boston, in many communities. On the process front, I think it's critical that we focus on expediting or cutting the red tape, as I've heard some counselors say. I think there's been great models that were presented in the document, looking at Austin in particular. I would say that for 100% affordable developments, although I know there's a parallel conversation around concentration of poverty and mixed income, which I am strongly in support of. But in the case of CDC development, 100% affordable housing developments that meet whatever dimensional requirements and affordability tiers the city sets as a goal under such an ordinance like this, the goal really should be elimination of a cumbersome public process, besides perhaps courtesy meetings with neighbors and community groups. But as long as a proposal is within the confines of what an ordinance says, I really believe we need to focus on expediting the process with a single point of contact in City Hall to facilitate review from the various departments. And in addition to that, eliminate processing fees altogether. While the permitting fees are not necessarily the biggest budget buster in an affordable pro forma, cost of construction and other elements of the development process are rising. Construction costs in particular are rising in our region. And so any relief that the city can give to help keep that magic total development cost per unit below that $500,000 limit essentially set by the Department of Housing and Community Development to the state, I think would be critical, particularly for those LIHTC funded projects. One of the main priorities on the zoning relief front for affordable housing, as we heard last time from representatives, councilors in Cambridge and Somerville, where similar affordable housing overlays were passed, should be to give developers of affordable housing a competitive advantage over market rate developers in the acquisition of new lands and sites for their developments. If an affordable housing developer can spread the costs of acquiring a property over more units than a market rate developer can for the same site, therein lies their advantage, and it will make these affordable developers much more competitive on the market, particularly potentially in neighborhoods that haven't seen as much of the development, affordable housing development particularly. So I agree that the fact that much of the development in Boston, the fact that it is done by variance, means that a simpler bonus above base zoning, as they've set in Cambridge and Somerville, doesn't, at least at this point, work to give affordable housing developers this competitive advantage. The benefit, however, of having a clear formula codified into zoning and done by right, although I am not an attorney, is that it makes it much more difficult for abutters to sue versus when it's done by variance, as we're currently facing the situation of Pine Street Inn development on Washington Street in Jamaica Plain. So perhaps the approach presented in the document, whereby affordable developments would be eligible for a certain percentage above density of recently approved primarily market projects in surrounding areas, is the correct way to go in lieu of more comprehensive zoning reform in the city of Boston, which I believe we need. However, I would caution that we think fully about the implications of this. When I read that concept, what occurred to me is that while in development boom times in the city of Boston, like in recent years, this formula may result in beneficial higher density affordable housing developments, I would hate to see it result in smaller affordable housing developments being built during more lean years or more recessionary times, when the need for affordable housing may be even greater. Of course, the need for affordable housing is always great in our city. So just, finally, in drafting this ordinance, I would encourage the council and the administration to continue to make sure to bring in affordable housing developers to this conversation, as well as users of affordable and residents of affordable housing. I have my experience in the field, both as a developer and housing advocate, but as we all know, Boston is rich with local affordable housing entities, nonprofits like CDCs, and a number of Boston-based national developers that can speak to what other cities may or may not be doing. I know that in Somerville and Cambridge, they both worked closely with those who produce the affordable housing to make sure that the ordinances were set in a way that would actually result in more units being built. And so, I just think that's important to do. I feel fortunate to be part of this conversation, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak today. And I would like to see others in the affordable housing world also included, which I know they have been to some degree already. So those are the comments I have. I'm happy to answer any questions if they may be, if there may be any. Otherwise, I'm happy to hand it back over to Councilor Wu.
Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll back to councilors for a second round of questions for any of the panelists, including Jesse and the administration. Councilor Bach.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilor Wu. And thank you, Jesse, for those really helpful comments. I strongly agree with you that, the objective here needs to be that the thing is not just that we need to come up with things that are going to save time and money, but that they need to sufficiently predictably save time and money, that a developer looks at the opportunity to develop affordable housing at a site and says, oh, I know I'm going to achieve some of those cost and time, which is really a form of cost, right? Savings, because it's in many ways, it's that decision to purchase the land or that decision to launch an affordable housing project that we're trying to incentivize. And so that's where, developers talk all the time about predictability. I think, and that's in tension with the community's desire to customize, right? And that's what comes out through our development review process. I think that part of the point of an affordable housing overlay is to say we have such a strong public need for affordable housing that it is worth it to us to standardize some of these things and remove some of the opportunities for customization by the community of the project, right? In order to, and that should be a high bar. I don't think that that's something we need to do for everybody who wants to develop anything. But I think when it comes to affordable housing, we have such a need, and you do see projects get stretched out over time, and you see people just not propose projects because it doesn't feel like a sure enough thing that they're going to be able to get it through in a way that's going to add up from a pro forma perspective. So I strongly agree with you on that. I did just want to, I wanted to ask you just to clarify a little bit. I missed slightly the point you were making about what the accidental bad incentive would be of the bonus system in a down economy. So I was just wondering if you could speak to that a little bit in a little more detail.
Yeah, so as I read it, the suggestion, and I know it's just a sort of a brainstorm, the suggestion was that because Boston uses variances to a larger degree than Cambridge or Somerville, using the most local examples of this type of ordinance, that just setting a simple threshold of density bonus or whatever it may be above base zoning doesn't necessarily work in the city of Boston. This is what was written in the document. And so the suggestion was that perhaps the percentage, and I'm just thinking through this. I mean, I think this is, this is a new idea. Perhaps it should be set sort of essentially the density bonus for affordable housing should be set as a percentage above the density approved for recent market rate developments in that area. So, they didn't in the document, it wasn't written how many years recent is. Certainly if we use, let's say 5 years right now in the city of Boston, that would result in a great bonus for affordable housing, given what has been permitted over the last 5 years or so in Boston. Thinking about what happened immediately after, the last, not the current recession, the last recession, where development for a number of years did tank in the city of Boston. My concern is that that formula would result in a lower density bonus allowed for affordable housing. I don't know if I was clear in clarifying. Does that make sense?
No, I totally see what you mean. You're saying we could set up we could accidentally set up a lagging indicator where it's like,
right.
oh, we didn't do that much development the last 5 years and we're using that as the basis for this bonus. And so we're not kind of, yeah, I get it. Right.
That's
And for people's reference back at home. So our challenge with this, and it's one of the puzzle pieces that we're trying to think through. And I appreciate Jesse's point. We really wanted to get the departments on and counselors on today, but we've been talking to folks, who do affordable housing development, and we will be talking to more because it's really in many ways, it's their heads that we have to get in, because what's going to make people actually, do these projects. But the challenge we face in Boston, and I alluded to at the top, is that, in Somerville, they've now got this like really simple form-based zoning that's sort of like, oh, here you can do 4 stories and here you can do 5 and here you can do 6. And it's like very simple and zone-based. And so it's really easy to say, oh, +1, right, at all these different levels. In Boston, it's really not like that. And often we're seeing, it's like on the one hand, every new development needs a variance. On the other hand, that variance can bring relief that's considerably more than like what Somerville is talking about. And so the challenge is kind of like, how do you think about something across the board? And so we were trying to think a little bit about, is there a way to use parcel data and kind of have some average number in an area that sort of lets you know that you're basically going to give an all affordable project a little bit of a boost. And so I think we still have to play around with that data wise. If I'm allowed to share my screen, Madam Chair, is that permissible?
I will.
I think I can. I think I can.
Stall while central staff works on it. Thank you, team.
I think I'm allowed. I just want to make sure before I do it. Are you okay with it if I do it?
Yes, of course.
Okay, all right. So, well, I'm going to do a very risky thing and share my whole screen because I can't figure out how to. Do you guys see this table right now? Are you seeing a table?
We see the table, but I would expand it because we can see some messages on the side as well.
Okay. All right, there we go. How's that? Can you see that? So this is, I just wanted to draw people's attention to, in the memo, we actually linked to this, but this is an LA proposal, well, not proposal, it's a program in LA for granting these discretionary housing permits, administrative housing permits, where basically housing development that's affordable in a certain way, and it's described in this red below. I won't linger on it, but it's basically like, it's a significant affordable development. They basically have this sliding scale where the more housing you're setting aside affordable, and then depending on what AMI you're setting it aside affordable at, you get these different density bonuses off the base of what you're authorized to have. And so I just wanted to draw people's attention to that as a kind of interesting case, to Councillor Edwards's point of sort of thinking about density bonuses and thinking about, again, if we did something with parcel data, is there a sort of creative way to do something like that in our system? That's something I'm wondering about. I'd love BPDA thoughts on that. I guess the one other comment I wanted to enter before just going to the BPDA for any thoughts on that is I know a number of councilors have mentioned the importance of mixed income housing, and I totally agree. But I want to say a couple things. So one is that 100% affordable projects can be mixed income. We have a very wide variety of what we count as affordable in the city of Boston. We've got, our 30% AMI, extremely low income housing. We've got our sort of 60% limit with tax credits and with vouchers. We've got 70% at IDP. We've got 80 to 100 with some of the IDP affordable home ownership options. And then we've got some even above that in projects where we've really been trying to get that kind of middle high tier to be able to also stay in the city. So I think there's a way of defining a policy that's sort of about 100% affordable, quote unquote, that is still creating those kind of mixed income communities that the council's focusing on. I also think that 100% affordable buildings within the context of a mixed, economically diverse neighborhood can be part of a true mixed income community. So I think we often see, economies of scale and frankly, like really positive community benefits of having seniors all in a building together. There's sort of shared amenities. And I think also, I mean, throughout my district, I can think of, there's a really great 100% affordable building at the corner of Gurney and Tremont. It's technically across the line in Council President, now Mayor Janey's district, but I sort of count it as mine. But it's 100% affordable family housing that allows you to concentrate some amenities, but it is very much mixed into a mixed income neighborhood. So I do think that I want to stress that there's an opportunity for us to support 100% affordable housing without, I think, it being part of sort of doubling down on housing segregation. I actually think it can be the way to actually get units at scale into some of our more economically segregated neighborhoods and mix them up more. And to Jesse's point, the one other thing I want to add is just, Jesse mentioned in addition to permits to freeing up fees, mentioned the possibility of having a kind of single point person. And definitely a thing I've heard from affordable housing developers is the challenge of sort of going through Article 80 and then feeling like you've only just begun in the process of talking to ISD, talking to water and sewer, talking to, just BTD, all of our groups. And so, I think the BPDA does a lot to try to centralize those with scoping sessions and such, but I think it would be interesting to think about as we think about an expedited review process, not just a kind of hearing spot that's maybe separated and special for them at the ZBA, but also how to kind of how to collate more of that department response. And also I think that waiving permit fees, obviously it costs the city money, so we have to think about doing it judiciously. That's why I think 100% affordable projects is a high enough bar for it to make sense. I also think that it's part of sending a signal. I think if we waive an ISD fee, we're also sort of telling ISD, hey, this is a real policy priority for the city of Boston. And so this is something that we want department time to be dedicated towards. And I just think in terms of expediting that's also important. So those were mostly comments, but I did want to ask BPDA what you think about kind of the idea of density bonusing and density bonusing off of some kind of average of parcel data or something else outside of the box, just kind of any initial reactions.
Well, I'll take a quick shot at that. I think that's something we need to sort through a little bit and sort of, gamify a little bit, test it out and see what that actually looks like on the ground in different neighborhoods. What would that produce? But, one thing I would like to suggest that, when we talk about density bonuses, a lot of times the way we try and look at it is look at it through the lens of good urban design first. What makes sense on the site in terms of height and density and massing and so on. And that plays out all the time. I don't think we do anybody any favors if we can't figure out what good design is and then say, oh yeah, to get affordable, we're going to tack a few more floors on it or add another point of FAR, because now we've gone beyond what a good urban design is. No one's going to be happy with the result if we have buildings that just don't work in their neighborhoods. So I think figuring out what that form-based code sort of approach, what's the good urban design first, and then for developers, if you want to get to the good urban design, you're going to have to overperform on the affordability part. So it's just a different way of looking at the density bonus. But I think sometimes when people hear density bonus, they think you take a good building and then tack a few more floors on it, and that's what you get. And I don't think that's quite the direction we should be going. I looked at the Cambridge and Somerville thing, and you're absolutely right. For 3-4 story buildings, you can do that and not have much of an impact. But if you add 20% to a 10-story building, it begins to have an impact. And so we need to be mindful of that.
Yeah, I think so. I would be curious to see the LA mall. I had a chance to go out to LA last year with the city, and kind of they have a lot of dense development happening. And I don't know if this is based off some of that. I think the density of the development kind of can vary in what you are able to extract relative to density bonuses. But I think we're obviously always looking at creative ways to try to get at the heart of this issue. So I think we'd be open to, if you want to share that with us so we can look at it.
Great. Thanks so much, Madam Chair. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Councillor Bach. Okay, I'm running down the list to see who else is still here. I believe Councillor Mejia is next. Okay, I'll give Councillor Mejia a minute in case there's tech issues or she might have stepped away. Councillor Edwards, thank you for stepping in.
Thank you. Is Jesse still here?
Yes, I am.
Hi, Jesse. How are you?
Good, Councillor Edwards. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much. So I am so happy to, I couldn't agree with you more about a standardized understanding of what is above normal. And I think as what is typically given out in order to incentivize, I think that's one of the key things I walked away from your comments, which is it's got to be financially beneficiary, right? For
Absolutely.
folks to develop affordable housing, there's got to be an understanding that this is where the money's at.
Mhm.
Right. And so I'm one of the things I think I'm curious about is convincing not only people that this is where the money's at, but what are we supposed to do when it comes to developers and long-term affordable housing? Because I don't know that it's really been clear to a lot of people that permanently affordable housing is where the money's at. I think a temporary relief or temporary kind of like the shorter term affordable housing has gotten that understanding, or tax credit affordable housing has gotten that understanding. But I am finding that there's permanently make this affordable, and people are not understanding how that's financially incentive. So if you could speak to permanently affordable housing and the financial incentives that make sense, or the financial narrative that makes sense for that's where the money's at. I also really would love for you to speak to the ownership component versus rental. I think that's really key in terms of dealing with the racial wealth gap, right? Which we have a disgustingly huge one here in Boston. I'm sure in Cambridge too. But so if you could speak to those two things, I'd really like to just hear your perspective on that.
I don't know that I'm completely clear on the question about permanent. So are you, Councillor?
I guess the question is there still the same kind of, the money could be there, the money's where it's at when it comes to permanently affordable housing, permanent, like, with the land trust and the deeds and so on and so forth, as opposed to what I think we're getting a lot of, which is a kind of a temporary, or right now it's a certain percentage of them, but the percentage is, set at 13% and the rents go up as they naturally do, and so on and so forth. And we have found that there are people who can no longer afford the affordable units. I'm looking at the Beverly, downtown, that there are people who came in, were able to get in at an affordable rate, and the rents went up.
Well, and those are
because they made it up after the fact.
Pardon my ignorance. That's an IDP development, correct? Or is that 100% like a tax credit development?
It was a workforce housing development downtown where they did do affordable workforce housing, but the problem is the rents went up.
Sure. Yeah. So I don't know that I have a great answer for you. And maybe, I don't know, maybe D&D can address this to some degree, but when I'm thinking about projects that would be eligible under this type of ordinance, similar to the types of projects that are eligible under the Cambridge and Somerville ordinances, I'm generally thinking these are your more traditional tax credit developments, funded with federal and state low-income housing tax credits, with some project-based Section 8 and other subsidy from the state as well as from D&D. And in those cases, yes, rents can go up, but it's not, it's not set by the market. It's set under guidelines, governed by HUD and DHCD and D&D. And so there's at least some predictability in those types of developments in terms of the long-term rent level for these types of units. And then, under the tax credit program, with most of the units, no more than 60% of AMI, and some of them lower than that, the rents are theoretically already set at a somewhat more affordable level than at least the market rent in the city of Boston. So, I think the conversation about how to, prevent, owners of affordable housing, how to prevent them from raising rents larger or higher year after year is a policy discussion around, project-based rental subsidies, perhaps the city can help fund. But I do generally see these types of projects under this ordinance primarily being those done by the great CDCs we have across the city of Boston, rather than under IDP. So I don't know if that answers your question. On the second point, well, I don't know if you want to follow up. I will allow you.
I think well, I think we were talking about two different builders of 100% affordability. So if you're talking for the folks who are going to be incentivized to make the profit and be of your narrative, which is, it's where the money's at, are going to be for-profit developers. The CDCs, if we're only talking about them getting zoning relief, which is, what prompted, I think, one of our co-sponsors, certainly the lead sponsors on this, because, there was 100%, affordable housing that was done by an incredible nonprofit that was just shot down due to ridiculous zoning opposition. I think that then we have a different narrative. I mean, they're not totally motivated by profit. They're motivated by it's what it makes sense to do. I feel so. I think that's where I'm not even saying we're saying different things. I'm asking about the for-profit, where the money's at narrative that you discussed. How do we make sure that they buy into, or that it's still really it's where the money's at to do permanently affordable housing?
So I apologize if I wasn't clear in my statement. I wasn't talking so much about profit motivated developers, although there are some that do large percentages, if not completely affordable developments. I think what I was referring to was more around the cost and making it so that those, primarily nonprofit developers, CDCs, can be more competitive against market rate developers for land in the city of Boston, right? If a nonprofit developer, or putting nonprofit aside, if a developer of 100% affordable housing can acquire a site at a high cost, but then spread that cost over more units than a market rate developer can, that's what I think the competitive advantage is. It's easier for them to make the case to DND, to DHCD, that they are worthy of funding for this development, or for assistance to acquire the property. So I wasn't so much concerned about the profit motive. I was trying to say it should be structured so that affordable housing developers have an advantage against, or in competition with market rate developers who can just, who can spend a ridiculous amount of money per unit to acquire sites, and therefore disadvantage nonprofit developers.
Okay.
So I'm less concerned with the profit motivated developers in this scenario. On your second question around home ownership, absolutely. I think that needs to be part of the conversation. I think, the elements I talked about, whether it's, permitting relief, single point of contact, and some of the zoning considerations, can just as easily apply to home ownership of affordable development as it can to rental, and it should. And I agree with you that when it comes to wealth building, home ownership is critical. One of the problems that we face in the affordable housing industry is that there is not a lot of subsidy available from the state to do home ownership, like there is to do rental housing. So that is also a policy question and consideration, I think, for the city of Boston and for the state. But I absolutely agree with you. Affordable home ownership needs to be part of this conversation as well. And however we can incentivize that, perhaps over rental in some scenarios, I think we should we should do. And I will give thoughts to that and share them with you and other members of the council.
Yeah, and I think when we go to discuss this afternoon IDP increases and figuring out what those could look like, I think ownership will have to be tied to a higher IDP, excuse me, a higher AMI. But I still think that if there's a better mix of home ownership in there, that we should also be thinking about zoning relief as well.
I agree.
So there's a certain mix that we're going to have to come up with. I think because I think we're beyond, for most of us are beyond just keeping people housed. It's keeping people housed and also helping to have generational wealth and growth, which is what has been which has created the wealth gap. So I can't, I don't think anyone here is saying not to consider it. I just feel that it's being considered as an afterthought too much in terms of this. And I think it really should be a forethought in the home ownership. I think just to respond to Councillor Bach's comment on the 100% housing, I agree. And thank you for the clarification so folks understand. We're not talking about 100% publicly subsidized housing. We're talking about varying AMIs on a bell curve. Right, as on a bell curve with the curve starting at a different AMI in the middle, maybe a little bit lower than where it starts right now, not at the 70, maybe a little bit lower, but it does bell curve so that there are people who are paying 100%, maybe even more than the 100% AMI, but it is on a bell curve. So I did want that to be understood, and thank you for that clarification, Councillor Bach. And that's it.
Tim, did you have a point on this?
Yeah. I do want to thank the counselor for bringing up the issue of homeownership. I think that all along we've thought about 100% zoning for 100% affordability. We were including homeownership and rental. So just thank you for calling that out separately. And in response to the question about the Beverly is in some ways a unicorn, but what it does have that is common of any building is it has an income restriction on all the units. And that income restriction sets what the maximum rent is. I'm not in the know about what the Beverly's rent policies were, but I know they have units that go up to 165% of AMI. And in the initial rent up, they may have rented those units at rates that were below their maximum rent, and then the following year raised them to the maximum rent. So there's still that predictability, but yes, that is a specific kind of situation to be watchful for, is where that tenant moves in thinking they're going to be paying $1,500 a month, and then it's all of a sudden $1,800, and yet it's still at the maximum of, it's still below what they can charge, or it isn't what they can charge at most. Not sure if that was clear enough.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. So I'm going to just call Councilor Mejia if in case she had questions, and if not, I know Councilor Bach can close up. You're good, Councilor Mejia? Okay, Councilor Bach.
Yeah, thanks so much, Madam Chair. I wanted to just a couple comments on the points raised by Councilor Edwards, and then just to thank everybody. But on the profit incentive, I think it's important to note that so right now there are lots of for-profit developers in the city who do affordable development. I mean, just off the top of my head, right? Wynn, Trinity, Beacon, more that I can think of. Obviously, Leggett McCall is doing it in your district, Corcoran. So there's a substantial industry of for-profit affordable housing developers in addition to our nonprofit CDCs. And the good thing that I wanted to sort of reassure you on this point is that any of those folks, when they're doing affordable housing development, they're doing it on a pro forma that kind of ensures them that they're going to have the kind of profit and fee that they can finance across, it might be a 30-year time horizon or whatever, but basically people should not be building into their pro formas, and they don't have to do affordable housing development, the assumption that in 30 or 40 or 50 years, they're going to be able to sell for a windfall because it's not permanent affordable housing. Now, in practice, often people have gotten to that point, right, with our 40-year restrictions and gotten to sell and have that windfall. But because of the distance in time and the windfall being uncertain, you can't actually get the banks to finance the projects on that basis. So all of that is just a way to say that I don't think that, I think that we should assume when we're talking about this, that we're talking about trying to get permanent affordability. And I don't think that making it permanent affordability limits the financeability. I think it just limits the opportunity for that windfall down the road. So I wanted to flag that. I also wanted to, I wanted to underscore your point that, in my optimal world, of course, we would be pursuing this 100% affordable, zoning relief, and we would be talking about opportunities for the city to do it directly on public land. I think that's something Councilor Wu and I have talked about in our other hearing. These things all kind of have a synergy. On the home ownership front, Jesse brought this up, but there is a real lack of affordable home ownership money in the state. And that was a big part of the coalition that pushed the Community Preservation Act, was the fact that it could be used for home ownership. And obviously the council has before it, I think tomorrow, an opportunity to fund with the latest round of CPA awards, another $5 million going into this One Plus Boston home ownership program. Down the road, I think it would be really interesting to think about, okay, so with One Plus Boston and other home ownership programs, like we're spending X $1,000s per person to create an affordable home ownership opportunity where they're buying a house. Are there opportunities to spend a similar amount per person to build new affordable home ownership units, right? So same thing. I think you're 100% right that we have to have affordable home ownership in tandem with affordable rental whenever we're talking about this, and that any zoning relief we do should include both of them. But I think the undergirding thing is how do we make these projects, the word unicorns come up several times. I guess I'm trying to figure out how we mass produce more unicorns, right? Like how instead of every great accomplishment, 100% affordable building in the city being like this wild thing that comes together as the result of a whole bunch of improbable circumstances, having it be something that our zoning is more actively encouraging and smoothing the way for. And I think there is room to improve on that front. And that's really where I'm grateful for and looking forward to the partnership of council colleagues and also the departments on this call today, BPDA and D&D and Jesse and the advocate community, and also the affordable CDCs and just like everybody in this mix. Cause I don't think we've quite gotten there yet for kind of smoothing the way. And now I'm mixing metaphors, but yeah, mass producing unicorns on the affordable housing front. That's my goal. And thank you so much, Madam Chair, for your indulgence.
Can I respond to one thing or two things actually that Councilor Bach just said? One, I'm really glad that I'd been trying to figure out when to interject a point about financeability and affordability and perpetuity. So for my whole time at the city, which you all know is not super long, but as long as I've been here and for a few years before that, we have required affordability in perpetuity on all rental projects. And what comes out to usually 50 years of affordability on homeownership projects, which has to do with state law about financing homeownership. But on the rental side, where we have required in perpetuity for any project that accepts city funds, those projects have had no trouble getting financing on the private market. So we have real life experience to say that that's not a problem. So I just wanted to make sure that was out there. And also, Tim said earlier, from D&D's perspective, we don't sort of view rental and home ownership as different when it comes to getting those projects permitted and ready to go. And so the one thing that I would encourage the council to think about is we had started the conversation today talking about very large projects. And we do have a fair number of all home ownership projects, but they tend to be smaller for various reasons. So I would encourage the council to think, if you're going to do any kind of change to make it easier for affordable projects to get permitted, to not distinguish between rental and home ownership, but perhaps if you want to be sure to hit home ownership projects, to think about a smaller threshold on unit number.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Jess.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. I think that concludes our questions. I'm checking to see if no one else in the waiting room to testify. So Open to final remarks from any of our counselors if you wish to chime in. Councillor Bach?
Just to thank everybody again and say we're going to be actively working on this. So my office will be reaching out to everybody to follow up on getting something drafted, but really grateful for the participation today.
Thank you. Councillor Edwards or Mejia?
No, thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone. This will conclude our hearing. Really appreciate your time. Look forward to the follow-up. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great meeting.
Thank you.